Mr Deputy Speaker, it was March 18th, 2003. Both you and I were in the House that day. It was an ugly, brutal day. It was one of these huge set-piece occasions that we have in the House of Commons where every single thing was reported, every single nuance noted. It was the day that we voted to go to war, and I will never, ever forget it. I was the whip that day, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I remember observing the government whips rounding up the recalcitrant, the doubters, those that were trying to make up their mind. And I remember lots of good women and men being dragooned into that lobby to support their Prime Minister in the fabrication of a case in Iraq against their better judgment. It was a horrible day. A day that should be ingrained into the collective consciousness of this House and remembered for its eternal shame. It was the day that we voted to go to war on a total fabrication, and we must find out why this House decided to go to war. Now, yes,
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and he reminds me of the time, I wasn't in this House at the time, but it reminds me of the time that the then Deputy Prime Minister was making an argument that the roadmap for Palestine was somehow connected to the maiming and the murder in Iraq.
What I did, Mr Deputy Speaker, just to try and get a flavour of what that House was like that day, I actually watched the YouTube video of Tony Blair's speech of that morning. I know it seems a bit masochistic, but I wanted to find out what was said and what the case for war was. What I had to listen to was just absolute and utter nonsense, fabrications, flights of fancy, which he must have known were totally false and ridiculous. He said there was weapons of mass destruction that was without doubt. They could reach us in 45 minutes, but there were none. There was nothing there. This House was misled. This House was duped, and I listened to the Conservative members who said that they believed the Prime Minister. The rest of the country knew. The rest of the country were fooled by his mendacious nonsense. Of course they weren't. We were on a march in central Glasgow. 100,000 people turned up in Glasgow to march against that war. 1 million people turned up in London to march against this war. But yet this House voted to go to war on the basis of a lie. A House that was duped, a House that was misled. And if anybody needs to know the case, the reasons and why this House was misled, it is us, the parliamentarians. Now, I'm disappointed in the honourable member for Halton Price. He shouldn't have changed his motion. We should have demanded today that we got that report. I don't want to hear the reasons about why we're not getting it. I don't want to hear the process about when we're going to get it in the future. We should have it now. We should have it now before the election. And this suggestion that somehow that this is political, somehow this gets in the way of our democratic process in the run-up to the election, again, is just fatuous nonsense. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
The member give way, and I too recall that day, and I want to concur with everything he's saying about the way in which people who were feeling very strongly about this were being pushed and cajoled, and notes coming in and letters coming asking you to meet with all sorts of people. Does he not think that this also tells a lesson that this House must always be very, very careful that the rule of the whips and the party machine doesn't always get their way?
I'm so grateful to the Honourable Lady because she makes such a powerful, important point. Something as important as going to war, where there was the sense, I was just a new Member of Parliament, I had just been in the House for a year, I was just a young whippersnapper barely out of shorts, and listening to a Prime Minister make this case, I mean, I thought, surely there must be something in it. But I realise now, along with all these other members of the House, it wasn't. So something as important as going to war shouldn't be whipped on this basis. Now, I'm not going to give way to any more. The House passed the vote in Iraq by 412 to 149. I was amongst the 149. My honourable friend was amongst the 149. The honourable gentleman across there in the Liberal Party, I can see two of them present just now, were amongst that 149. It's the proudest vote of my 14 years in this House. It was a vote that defined the Parliament between 2001 to 2005. It was a vote, I believe, now characterised the Labour government. Yes. It was a vote which is now personally associated with Tony Blair. It will follow him to the grave. It will be on his tombstone. And such is his association with... You'd as well just having it tattooed on his forehead. The Iraq war will forever be bound up with the last Labour government and the personality of the last but one Prime Minister. And we're still... Yes, I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Thank the Honourable Member very much for giving way. Isn't there a danger in this debate that this is going to become an opportunity for self-congratulation or self-laceration on the part of Members of Parliament, rather than focusing on the real lessons for how Britain acts in the world?
I want to come on to this because this is so important, because this House was misled. I don't know if the Honourable Gentleman agrees with that, but I'm sure, as somebody who understands and looks at these issues, he knows that this was a total fabrication. I see him shaking his head to that. The case for war was non-existent. Now, we've got to understand why a majority of the members of this House voted for that. We have got to start to get to the bottom of it, to reason why this was allowed to happen. Because we're still feeling the implications, the repercussions. 500,000 presumed dead. A region destabilised, a country divided, international diplomacy discredited. And it's the point that the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Bradford West made. We've alienated a generation of young Muslims here and around the world, dangerously radicalising many of them, giving them a grievance for some of the perverted causes that's now been picked up in order to justify what they see as their perverted agenda. Things that we now have to deal with in terms of our own security. That is what Iraq bequeathed us. We've got to find out how this happened, why these set of conditions were allowed for us to pursue this particular course of action. And I remember the almost ingenious lengths that the Labour government went to try and invent this case. Because I remember the House was recalled. It wasn't just that day in March. We were recalled in September the previous year to come down to find in their pigeonholes the document that then became known as the dodgy dossier. 100 and odd pages of utter drivel. Again, manufactured fabrications, plagiarised sources. And we've actually found that most of it came in a postdoctoral work from some student called Ibrahim Al-Marashi. It almost seemed like it was a comedy sketch and script. But this was the UK being prepared to go to war in the 21st century. We now know, of course, there were never any weapons of mass destruction, still less any that could be deployed in 45 minutes. There was no collusion with Al-Qaeda, even though jihadists wander at will in the IS forces across Iraq now. There was no evidence of any uranium project, and nothing whatsoever could be found relating to any nuclear programme. We were misled. This House was misled. Now, there's several people in this House now who understand and realise that they were duped. But there are still people who believe that it was right to go to war. Now, I'm very fond of the Right Honourable Member, the member for Blackburn, but he has to, at some point, say that this was a total fabrication, that the House was misled, and that a case was fabricated to go to war. And the sooner he does that, I think the sooner the Right Honourable Gentleman gets himself off a hook, because this is going to pursue him and the other people who made this case for war to the very end of the careers. Now, I don't think it's going to end with this report. We've had 4 whitewashes, we've had 4 attempts to try and put this to bed. It's not going to end. We're going to get this report. I don't think it's going to get there. I think it's another generation before we get to the truth in Iraq. Are we going to have a judge-led inquiry? Possibly. That might help us get there. But this is going to go all the way. And I foresee that there will be significant people who will be taken eventually to The Hague, because this is just such an important issue that has redefined so much contemporary foreign history. People say it's a disaster bigger than Suez. Of course it is. This was the biggest single foreign policy blunder and disaster that was ever made by any government in modern history. So we do need Chilcot. We do need to see. Do I believe that we'll get to the heart of this with the Chilcot report? No, I do not. But I think it will go a long way to trying to describe and explain some of the things that happen. It will be another generation before we get to the absolute truth about this. There's too many big reputations to be tarnished and all that. And again, I say that to the Right Honourable Member, the member for Blackburn. There will be people who will be in a position to try and ensure that this is kicked into the long grass. And the only reason that I have any confidence in the Chilcot report is the establishment is trying to stop us seeing it. So there must be something good in it. That's all I could say about Chilcot. And I really hope that because of that, we might actually get a glimpse into the workings of this government. So we are where we are, Madam Deputy Speaker. We hope we get this report. We should have demanded its publication in this debate today, and I'm disappointed we're not getting the opportunity to do that. I really hope that we get this soon. I don't think it's going to be the end of the process. I do believe this is going to go all the way to The Hague. This was an illegal war that we went to on the basis of a fabrication and a downright lie. We deserve to know what the truth is about this. Someday we'll get it, but I don't believe it will be with Chilcot.
Well done. Yeah.